In the quiet suburb of Maplewood, where every house had freshly trimmed lawns and picket fences, a sudden disturbance rippled through the peace one cool autumn evening. It started with a stray dog, thin, scruffy, and seemingly exhausted, who appeared out of nowhere and took up residence near the cracked wall of an old abandoned house at the end of Hawthorne Lane. No one knew where the dog had come from, but it didn't take long for the neighbors to notice its strange behavior. Every night, as twilight deepened into darkness, the dog would return to the same spot and begin scratching, claws digging desperately into the peeling plaster and crumbling bricks of the house's east wall. The scratching wasn't gentle or playful. It was frantic, urgent, as if the dog was trying to claw its way into something unseen. Mrs. Henderson, the elderly widow who lived directly across the street, was the first to spot the animal. One night, as she peered through her living room window, the dull orange glow of her porch light revealed the silhouette of the dog frantically scraping the wall. "Poor thing," she muttered to herself, but the persistent noise grated on her nerves, and she found it hard to sleep afterward. Over the next few days, more neighbors began to notice the same scene. A group of kids playing nearby stopped to watch, whispering theories about the dog's odd fixation. "Maybe it's hungry," suggested one boy, though he didn't seem convinced. "Or maybe it's haunted," said another, half joking but wide-eyed. Despite their guesses, the dog's behavior didn't waver. Night after night, like clockwork, it would return to the same spot, scratching until its paws were raw and bleeding. Its fur was matted with dirt and dust, and a faint whimpering sound occasionally escaped its throat, almost like a cry for help. The house itself was a relic of forgotten times. Its paint was peeling, windows boarded up with warped planks, and the garden had long since been overtaken by weeds and wild vines. Rumors swirled about why it had been abandoned. Some said the previous owner disappeared under mysterious circumstances, while others claimed the house was cursed after a series of tragedies decades ago. Curious neighbors began gathering quietly, just beyond the dog's reach, watching from a distance. Most were reluctant to get too close. Superstitions die hard in places like Maplewood. One particularly brave teenager, Sarah, tentatively approached the dog one evening. She crouched down, extending a hand slowly to let it sniff her. For a moment, the dog stopped scratching and looked up, eyes gleaming with a strange intelligence. But then, with a low growl that sent a chill down Sarah's spine, it snapped at her hand and bolted into the darkness. That was enough to keep most people away. Still, the scratching continued relentlessly. One night, a loud thud echoed through the street, causing neighbors to jump out of their beds. They rushed outside only to find the dog sitting quietly by the wall, staring intently at a spot where the plaster had loosened. A chill ran through Mrs. Henderson's spine as she noticed faint scratches etched deeper than before, almost as if someone had tried to claw through the wall long ago. As days passed, strange things began to happen. Shadows flickered behind the boarded windows, unexplainable noises echoed from within the empty house, and an icy draft swept through the street, even on still nights. Some residents reported hearing muffled sobbing, while others swore they saw fleeting shapes dart behind curtains. Rumors turned to fear. Parents kept their children indoors, and the neighborhood's usual cheerful chatter was replaced by hushed conversations and worried glances toward the dog and the ominous house. Despite the growing unease, no one dared to intervene. The dog, after all, was a stray, unowned, unclaimed, and wild in its desperation. Yet for all its ferocity, it seemed drawn by something unseen, something buried deep behind that crumbling wall. What was it that the dog was trying to reach? And why had it chosen that forgotten house to make it stand? As the moon hung low one particularly cold night, the dog's scratching suddenly stopped. It lifted its head, ears perked, and howled, a long, mournful sound that pierced the silence and sent shivers down the spines of every listener. In that moment, something shifted. The quiet neighborhood on Hawthorne Lane, until then untouched by fear, felt the first tremors of a mystery long buried, about to erupt with unimaginable force. Morning after the dog's haunting howl, the neighborhood was thick with unease. The usual sounds of children playing and birds chirping were replaced by hushed conversations and nervous glances toward the abandoned house. The scratching had stopped, But the mystery had only deepened. Mrs. Henderson sat on her porch, clutching a warm mug, her eyes never leaving the house across the street. "That dog, it's not just restless," she murmured to a neighbor who had come by for morning coffee. "It's trying to tell us something. I can feel it." Word spread quickly, as it always does in a small community. Some believed the dog had sensed a presence, something trapped inside the walls. Others whispered about ghosts and curses. A few dismissed it all as nonsense, but the truth was, nobody could explain the strange noises that had begun to echo from the house after dark. Faint tapping, distant sobs, and once a terrified whisper so low it barely stirred the night air. Sarah, the teenager who had tried to befriend the dog, found herself unable to shake the unease. School felt like a blur. Her friends joked nervously about the haunted house, but Sarah saw something in the dog's eyes, a plea. One afternoon, she dared to approach the property again. The overgrown garden swallowed her feet as she neared the wall, now cracked wider. Where the dog had scratched, she pressed her ear against the rough bricks. At first there was only silence, then a faint noise, a soft scratching, almost like nails clawing against wood from inside. Sarah pulled back sharply, heart pounding. Was someone trapped, or was the house itself alive with memories it refused to release? That night, Sarah's father locked the doors and windows tightly, refusing to let her near the house. But curiosity gnawed at her. Later, she peeked out her bedroom window and saw the stray dog sitting beneath the street lamp, its eyes fixed, on the wall like a sentinel guarding a secret. The next evening, more strange phenomena unfolded. Mr. Alvarez, a local handyman who often passed the house on his way home, heard footsteps inside the hollow structure. He swore they weren't his. "Own," he called out, but silence answered. His blood ran cold when a chilling whisper reached his ears, just beyond the boarded windows. "Help me!" His story spread quickly, but fear kept people from investigating further. Instead, they clung to safety in numbers, sharing theories, over cups of coffee and flickering TV screens. Meanwhile, the dog's nightly scratching resumed, more fervent than ever. The sound scraped at nerves and unsettled even the most skeptical. One evening, as the dog dug frantically, a loud crack split the air. A chunk of plaster fell away from the wall, revealing dark, rough wood behind. A group of neighbors gathered, their breaths visible in the cool night air, eyes wide in shock. No one dared move closer except Sarah, who knelt by the hole, peering inside. The space beyond was narrow and dusty, the stale scent of decay rising from the darkness. Sarah's flashlight barely penetrated the gloom, but what she saw froze her. In place, deep scratch marks inside the cavity, as if someone had clawed desperately to escape. A shiver ran down her spine. Could someone really have been trapped there? Later, in a frantic conversation with her parents, Sarah learned the house once belonged to a man named Gerald Crowley, who disappeared nearly 20 years ago. Rumors said he was a recluse, that he had enemies, but no one really knew what happened to him, or if anyone else had lived in the house during that time. As the sun rose, casting long shadows over Hawthorne Lane, the dog lay curled up on the sidewalk, exhausted but unyielding. It had chosen this spot for a reason. The neighbors realized that whatever secret the dog sensed was buried deep in the history of the house, and someone or something had been waiting to be found for a long time. That same day, a stranger arrived in town. The morning the stranger arrived, the neighborhood felt a subtle shift in the air, like the calm before a storm. He appeared quietly, stepping out of an old weathered sedan and moving toward the abandoned house with a purposeful stride. Tall and lean, dressed in a long dark coat despite the crisp autumn warmth, his eyes scanned the surroundings with a sharpness that unsettled those who noticed him. Mrs. Henderson was the first to see him. She was tending her garden when she spotted the man. He didn't look like the usual visitors who came by the neighborhood. No friendly wave, no introductions, just an intense, focused presence, almost as if he belonged somewhere else entirely. The dog, which had been dozing in the sun, suddenly lifted its head and growled low in its throat, ears flattening as it locked eyes with the stranger. The man paused, stared back, and for a brief moment, an unspoken understanding passed between them. Curious and cautious, a few neighbors began gathering at a distance. Sarah, determined to know more, edged closer behind a row of hedges. The stranger pulled a crumpled piece of paper from his coat pocket and glanced at it, then stepped toward the wall where the dog had been scratching. "You're the one," he murmured, voice low but steady, almost reverent. He reached out a hand and gently touched the dog's head. To everyone's surprise, the dog didn't pull away. Instead, it leaned into the touch, wagging its tail faintly, a stark contrast to the snarls and snaps from before. The stranger turned to the small crowd that had gathered. "I'm looking for something," he said quietly, his eyes dark and intense. "Something that's been hidden here for years. I believe it's behind this wall." His words sent a ripple of unease through the listeners. The house had been abandoned for decades, and no one had dared disturb it. What could possibly be hidden there that was worth such a dramatic return? Sarah stepped forward, her voice shaky but brave. "Who are you, and how do you know about the dog?" The stranger gave a faint, sad smile. "My name is Daniel. I lived nearby years ago, not far from here. I knew Gerald Crowley." The mention of the missing man caused a stir. People exchanged nervous glances. "You mean the man who disappeared?" Mrs. Henderson whispered. Daniel nodded. "Yes, I believe what happened to Gerald wasn't an accident, and I think the dog knows more than any of us." A cold breeze swept through the street as Daniel looked at the wall again, his jaw tightening. "That dog has been trying to tell us something. It's been trying to find a way in, to where—" The truth is, the neighbors hesitated. Some wanted to shut the whole thing down. "This house is dangerous," one man warned. "We don't need to stir up trouble." But Daniel was already moving, pulling a worn notebook from his coat. Flipping through its pages, he showed sketches of the house's layout, notes about hidden compartments, and even old news clippings about Gerald's disappearance. "This wasn't just a house," Daniel explained. "It was a prison. Someone locked Gerald, or maybe someone else was inside, and no one has looked for them until now." Sarah's heart pounded. The dog sat quietly at Daniel's feet, watching the strangers like a guardian. "Why didn't you come before?" she asked. Daniel's eyes darkened. "I tried, but people in this town didn't want the past disturbed. Some powerful figures were involved, and they made sure no one talked." The crowd murmured in disbelief. A few older residents crossed their arms tightly, as if remembering whispered warnings they'd long tried to forget. "Tonight," Daniel said, his voice firm, "I'm going to break through that wall. Whatever's behind it will finally be revealed." For a moment, silence hung heavy in the air. Then Mrs. Henderson, her face pale but resolute, spoke up. "If anyone can do it, Daniel, it's you. But be careful. Some secrets don't want to be found." The stray dog let out a soft bark, then began scratching the wall again, faster and more frantically than ever. The urgency in its movements was impossible to ignore, as if it knew that the moment had come. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across Hawthorne Lane, the neighborhood held its breath. The calm before the storm had passed. The real mystery and the danger were only just beginning. Nightfall came quickly to Hawthorne Lane, swallowing the street in darkness, save for the pale glow of scattered porch lights and a flickering street lamp near the abandoned house. The air was thick with tension, a collective holding of breath that seemed to pulse through the small crowd gathered just beyond the property line. Faces were tight with worry, eyes fixed on the crumbling wall where the stray dog was already scratching, frantic and insistent as if urging the stranger to hurry. Daniel stood at the ready, tools clutched in his hands, a sturdy crowbar, a hammer, and an old flashlight. He glanced once more at the dog, who looked back with an intensity that sent a shiver down his spine. The dog's eyes were wild, almost desperate, as if it knew what waited behind the wall and it was begging Daniel to set it free. The neighbors had gathered in hushed whispers, some clutching each other's arms, others holding phones ready to call for help if things went wrong. The atmosphere was electric, equal parts fear, curiosity, and hope. No one wanted to believe what might be lurking behind the wall, yet they couldn't look away. Daniel took a deep breath and raised the crowbar. The first strike was sharp, violent, and the dull crash echoed into the night, breaking the heavy silence. Dust and small debris showered down, and the dog barked sharply, then resumed scratching with even greater fury. It was as if the dog's energy fueled Daniel's. With every blow, the plaster and brick gave way, revealing the rough wooden frame beneath. But then, something unexpected happened. From inside the house, a space that had been silent for decades, came a sharp, piercing sound, a scream. It was not just a shout or a startled cry, but a raw, desperate scream, filled with terror and pain. The sound ripped through the night air and froze everyone where they stood. Daniel dropped the crowbar, his face draining of color as the scream echoed again, longer, louder, more frantic. The dog bolted through the debris with astonishing speed, claws scraping against broken bricks, barking frantically. It dove headfirst into the widening hole as if chasing a ghost. Daniel followed, the neighbors yelling for him to stop, to wait for help, but he didn't listen. Inside the narrow cavity behind the wall was darkness so thick it seemed to swallow the flashlight's beam. The air smelled of rot and dust, a stale breath from decades of neglect. Daniel's heart pounded so loud he was sure the dog could hear it. Somewhere in that pitch-black space, the desperate scratching continued, faint, urgent, alive. Then Daniel's flashlight caught a glimpse of something unexpected. A pair of dirty, trembling hands clawed at the far wall, desperate to escape. He could hear ragged breathing, the faintest sobbing that sent icy fingers up his spine. "Hello?" Daniel's voice cracked. "Are you there?" The answer was a weak, barely audible whimper. Panic surged through Daniel. He dropped his tools and reached in, feeling around the tight space. His fingers brushed something soft. Clothing, hair. Someone was trapped. Suddenly the dog barked sharply and scrambled backward out of the hole, its body tense, eyes wide with alarm. And then Daniel saw it. A dark, twisted figure appeared from the shadows of the broken wall. A man, or something. Like it, covered in grime and rags, his face a grotesque mask of fear and madness. His eyes were wild, staring directly at Daniel as he lunged forward with a scream that chilled the blood. Daniel stumbled backward, heart hammering. The figure's scream was so raw and unbearable, it echoed through the street, a sound no one would forget. Neighbors who had been watching now ran toward the house, flashlights raised and voices trembling. The dog barked furiously, snarling at the figure, who suddenly vanished deeper into the house's dark interior, leaving behind an oppressive silence that felt heavier than before. Daniel sank to his knees, gasping for breath, his hands trembling. The truth was no longer a rumor, no longer a whisper. It was real, and it had just screamed into their lives. The abandoned house on Hawthorne Lane was not empty. The scream still echoed faintly in the cool night air, lingering like a ghost over Hawthorne Lane. The neighbors stood frozen outside the crumbling house, the flickering flashlight beams trembling in their hands as they looked toward the gaping hole in the wall. The dog paced nervously, growling low, but never straying far from Daniel, who was still on his knees, catching his breath, his eyes wide with shock. Inside, the darkness seemed to press against the walls like a living thing, suffocating and thick with years of secrets. Daniel knew he couldn't just stand there. He had to know the truth. Whatever it was waiting somewhere in the bowels of the house. He stood slowly, wiping sweat from his brow, and shuffled through the rubble. The dog circled at his feet, occasionally barking softly, as if encouraging him forward. Then, with trembling hands, Daniel reached into the narrow crawl space beyond the broken wall and pulled out something small and heavy. Wrapped in filthy cloth was an old wooden box, bound tightly with rusted metal hinges and corroded locks. Daniel's heart pounded as he set the box on the ground and carefully pried it open. Inside was a collection of items that made the hair on the back of his neck stand on end. A bundle of brittle papers, yellowed with age, a small pair of children's, shoes worn and cracked, a faded photograph, a sepia-toned image of a young girl, her eyes haunting and full of sorrow. Daniel's hands shook as he spread out the papers. They were letters, torn and stained with what looked disturbingly like dried blood. As he scanned the pages, the story inside unfolded like a nightmare. The letters spoke of a child named Emily, a girl who had disappeared nearly 20 years ago in this very town. They hinted at a dark secret, whispered threats, a desperate plea for help, and a chilling warning not to trust those closest. Daniel looked up at the gathered neighbors, his voice low but urgent. This is Emily's story. She was locked away in that crawl space. Someone wanted to hide her." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Mrs. Henderson covered her mouth with trembling hands, tears shining in her eyes. "Emily? I remember that name. The town never stopped searching, but no one ever found her." Suddenly, a cold wind swept through the street, rattling loose shutters and stirring dry leaves. The dog growled fiercely, staring back toward the house's darkened doorway. Daniel's gaze followed the dog's. From deep inside, a faint sound emerged, a soft, ragged breathing, followed by a barely audible whisper. "Help me." The crowd fell silent, the weight of the moment sinking in. Emily wasn't just a memory, she was alive, or had been trapped here not so long ago. Daniel's mind raced. If the box held such secrets, what else was hidden inside the house? And who had done this terrible thing? Suddenly, footsteps echoed from the street, and a figure appeared in the dim light. A woman soaked from the evening's chill rain, her face pale and drawn with exhaustion. Her eyes locked onto Daniel's with a mixture of relief and terror. "I've been looking for you," she whispered urgently. "You don't understand. This isn't just about Emily, it's bigger, much bigger." The neighbors parted to let her through. She introduced herself as Claire, a journalist who had been quietly investigating the town's dark past for months. She had uncovered fragments of corruption, betrayal, and cover-ups that stretched back generations. "They tried to bury the truth," Claire said, her voice shaking. "But Emily's disappearance was just the start. The people responsible are still here watching." Daniel nodded grimly, feeling the weight of what lay ahead. The dog nudged his hand, grounding him in the present. It was no longer just a stray. It was a guardian, a key to unlocking the truth. As the night deepened, the neighbors gathered closer, forming a fragile circle of resolve. Together, they would uncover the secrets that had haunted their town for decades, no matter the cost. But, even as they pledged to fight for justice, Daniel couldn't shake the feeling that the darkness they had awakened was far from finished. Claire's arrival had stirred something in the neighborhood, a fragile hope wrapped in fear. As the small crowd gathered around Daniel and the journalist, the stray dog rested quietly at their feet, its watchful eyes never leaving the dark entrance of the house. Claire wasted no time. "We need to search the house thoroughly," she said, her voice firm but wary. If Emily was hidden in that crawl space, there might be more hidden beneath the floorboards or behind the walls. Daniel nodded in agreement. The mystery was far from over. In fact, it was only growing darker and deeper. Using flashlights and their phones for light, Daniel and Claire stepped cautiously inside the house. The neighbors held their breath outside, listening to every creak and groan as the two explored the eerie interior. The house smelled of mold and decay. Dust settled in thick layers on broken furniture, and cobwebs draped the corners like silent witnesses to decades of neglect. The air felt heavy, almost suffocating, as if the walls themselves held their breath. Claire moved toward the living room where the floorboards were warped and rotted. "Help me with this," she said, kneeling, near a section that looked suspiciously uneven. Together they pried up the boards, revealing a hidden trapdoor beneath. Daniel's heart hammered as he pulled it open, exposing a narrow staircase descending into darkness. "We need to go down," Claire said without hesitation. The neighbors outside heard muffled sounds, footsteps, whispered voices, and then a sudden sharp gasp. Daniel flicked on his flashlight and led the way, his breath shallow as they descended the stairs into what appeared to be a cellar, a cramped, cold space filled with old crates, broken furniture, and remnants of long-forgotten belongings. Then, from the far corner, Claire's light caught something that made her freeze, a small pile of tattered clothing and a dusty, weathered journal. Daniel picked up the journal, flipping through pages, filled with cramped handwriting. The entries spoke of fear and hope, of secret meetings and threats, and finally of a plan to escape. "It's Emily's," Claire whispered, her voice trembling. "She wrote this while she was trapped here." Suddenly, the dog barked sharply, ears pricked and body tense. It bolted toward a stack of crates, sniffing frantically. Daniel moved closer, heart pounding. Behind the crates, a loose panel in the wall shifted under his touch. With a grunt, he pushed it aside, revealing a small, dark opening. From within, a faint scratching echoed, desperate, frantic. Claire swallowed hard. "There's something or someone else down here." Daniel didn't hesitate. He reached into the opening and pulled out a frail, shaking figure, an elderly woman, her eyes wide with terror and confusion. Her clothes were filthy, and her face was marked by years of hardship. The woman looked up, her voice barely a whisper. "You found me." Neighbors rushed inside, their shock palpable. The woman's story spilled out between sobs. She was Gerald Crowley's sister, imprisoned and forgotten in this hidden cellar all these years, trapped by those who wanted to bury the family's dark secrets. As she spoke, it became clear that Emily's disappearance was part of a twisted web of lies, greed, and betrayal that had engulfed the town long ago, a web that someone was still desperate to keep hidden. Outside, the dog sat quietly by the wall, its eyes shining with an almost human understanding. It had been guarding them all along, a silent sentinel waiting for the truth to be unearthed. But as dawn approached, Daniel realized something chilling. The danger was far from over. The secrets buried beneath the floorboards had been uncovered, but the shadows lurking in the town's past were ready to fight back. The dawn had barely broken when the news spread. The elderly woman was alive, rescued from the cellar beneath the old house. But instead of relief, the neighborhood felt a creeping dread settle over them like a suffocating fog. Daniel and Claire sat with the woman in Sarah's living room. She introduced herself as Evelyn Crowley, sister of Gerald Crowley, the man who had vanished all those years ago. Her eyes were tired, haunted by decades of captivity, but the fire of defiance burned quietly within them. Evelyn's story was a twisted nightmare. Gerald had discovered corruption in the town's council, illegal dealings, bribes, and cover-ups that involved some of the most powerful people in the community. When he tried to expose the truth, he was silenced, and Evelyn was imprisoned in the hidden cellar to keep her quiet. Emily, the child whose belongings they'd found, was Evelyn's daughter, taken from her and hidden away, presumed dead. As Evelyn's tale unfolded, it became clear why the dog had been so desperate to break into the wall. It wasn't just protecting the house, it was protecting her, guarding the secret she had kept alive all these years. But with the secret revealed, danger lurked closer than ever. That night, Daniel stayed up, troubled by Evelyn's words. The people who did this, she warned. They're still out there watching, waiting. Suddenly, outside Sarah's house, the stray dog growled low, alert to something no one else could see. From the shadows, figures moved, silent, deliberate. Daniel's instincts screamed at him to act, but before he could, the power in the house cut out, plunging them into darkness. Claire scrambled for her phone's flashlight as a loud bang echoed from the front door. Someone was trying to break in. Neighbors rushed to the windows, shouting warnings. Daniel grabbed a heavy lamp, positioning himself between Evelyn and the door. The dog barked furiously, pacing near the entrance. Then, the door splintered inward, and two men in dark coats burst inside, faces obscured by scarves. They moved quickly, threatening and violent. Daniel confronted them, shouting, "What do you want?" "She's protected now," one man sneered. "You're meddling in things you don't understand. Stop digging or there'll be consequences." The other stepped forward, lunging toward Evelyn. In the chaos, Daniel pushed the attacker back and the dog sprang, teeth bared, knocking one man to the floor. Neighbors rushed in, flashing lights and calling the police. The intruders fled into the night, but their warning was clear. The community was no longer safe. In the aftermath, Daniel, Claire and Evelyn knew they had to act fast. They contacted a trusted lawyer, prepared to bring the corruption to light. But the threats continued. Anonymous notes slipped under doors, mysterious cars parked near houses late at night, and the dog's restless pacing as if it sensed a storm coming. Sarah clung to the dog, whispering soothing words. "You saved us," she told it, tears shining in her eyes. "We'll keep fighting together." The night stretched long and uneasy, the shadows heavy with secrets and danger. But one thing was certain. The fight for justice had only just begun, and the stray dog, once an ordinary creature wandering the streets, had become the unlikely hero of a town desperate to reclaim its truth. The next morning dawned grey and heavy with rain. The storm seemed to echo the turmoil gripping Hawthorne Lane. The town's restless silence had thickened overnight, replaced by a sense of impending reckoning. Daniel, Claire and Evelyn sat together in Sarah's modest kitchen, the air thick with nervous anticipation. The lawyer they'd contacted was due to arrive soon, ready to help expose the rot hidden beneath the town's surface for decades. Evidence had been collected, witnesses prepared, but the question remained, would justice prevail, or would those who thrived in the shadows find a way to bury the truth again? Outside, the stray dog lay quietly on the porch steps, eyes alert, despite the steady drizzle. It was as if the dog understood the significance of this moment, its watchful presence a silent vow to protect those who had finally dared to uncover the past. Just as the clock struck 10, the lawyer arrived, a sharp-eyed woman named Marissa, who moved with confident urgency. She pored over the documents and testimony collected by Daniel and Claire, nodding thoughtfully. "This is enough to shake the foundations," Marissa said. "But be prepared. The people involved won't go down quietly." No sooner had she spoken than a loud, insistent knocking sounded at the front door. Daniel exchanged a glance with Claire and Evelyn. Tension snapped tight in the room. When Daniel opened the door, a familiar face greeted him. The town sheriff, pale and grave. "We've received reports of suspicious activity around the old Crowley house," the sheriff said. "And threats against you and your neighbors have increased. We're stepping up patrols, but you should be careful." Daniel's jaw clenched. "We're not backing down," the sheriff nodded. "Good, but stay vigilant." As the day wore on, word of the investigation spread. News crews arrived, neighbors showed up with renewed hope, and even the mayor was forced to respond to the growing pressure. At nightfall, Daniel and Claire returned to the old house, the dog padding silently beside them. They felt an eerie stillness inside, as if the house itself was holding its breath. Daniel knelt by the wall where the dog had first scratched, tracing his fingers along the rough edges of the broken plaster. "Emily's story changed everything," he murmured, "and Evelyn's courage brought us this far." The dog nudged his hand, its warm nose steadying him in the cold night. Suddenly, a faint noise caught Daniel's attention, a soft, rhythmic tapping from beneath the floorboards. His heart quickened as he recalled the hidden trapdoor in the cellar. "Could there be more?" Claire whispered. Daniel carefully pried open the trapdoor once more, shining his flashlight into the dark void below. The beam illuminated a small wooden chest, untouched and waiting. With hands trembling, Daniel lifted the chest out and opened it. Inside were letters, photographs, and a worn diary belonging to Gerald Crowley himself. His final entries detailed the extent of the corruption, names, dates, bribes, a meticulous record that could bring down the town's most dangerous players. As Daniel read aloud, the dog suddenly barked sharply, ears perked, and sprinted toward the back door. "Daniel." And Claire hurried after it, stepping into the cool night air. There, near the garden, they found a fresh footprint in the mud, large and unmistakably human. Someone was still watching, but this time Daniel felt ready. The darkness had been unveiled, the lies exposed, and the town had found its voice as... The dog looked back at Daniel, eyes gleaming with fierce loyalty. He knew the fight for justice was far from over, but so long as the dog was by his side, they would face it together. The wall had been broken, and so had the silence.